Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky, yet another free agent is off the board. This one on the cheap. We'll talk about him next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. This one's always free, never behind paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is over 24,000 subscribers to the channel. Are all Andy wondering if the Lakers are ever going to make a move, even for a minimum guy. Anybody, is the offseason slipping away because Gary Trent Jr., a guy that a lot of teams have had their eye on, arguably, I guess, maybe the best of the remaining free agents out there. He is off to Milwaukee on a minimum deal, 1 year, veterans minimum. Needless to say, Lakers social media did not react well, so we'll get into that in a second. Jaylen Brown talking about Bronny James. Plenty to get into today. I do want to let people know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Gary Trent, Andy, is an imperfect guy. His shooting, which had been really good a couple of years ago, kind of fell off. He looked like he was on a trajectory that might take him a little further than he's been in terms of NBA accomplishments. But that said, to land a guy like him who was he's basically a 40% 3-point shooter, can defend a little bit on a minimum, that is a good move for Milwaukee and a frustrating one for Lakers fans.
Frustrating a bit too, by the way, for Gary Trent Jr., because by multiple reports, he had expected a far bigger payday than a veteran's minimum. He obviously sees the Bucks as an opportunity to showcase himself heading into next year's offseason and free agency. He's also reuniting with Damian Lillard. They played together for several years in Portland. I can't say with certainty that Dame recruited.
That is what the reports are, is that Lillard did that. But
right. Okay. I had not seen that. I just felt like the next logical step. And, we're going to talk, I'm sure, about how the Lakers' lack of roster space is one of the factors getting in the way of making deals right now. They have literally no available spots, and for the time being would need to either stretch and waive or salary dump, presumably one or more of Christian Wood, Cam Reddish, Jackson Hayes, maybe even Maxwell Lewis. It's also compounded too, frankly speaking, we're going to talk about him later, by Bronny having a guaranteed spot on the roster, and that being part of the deal with drafting him, as opposed to signing him as an undrafted free agent that could be given a two-way. Bronny is taking up a spot that becomes a complicating matter. But what I also think is interesting about this too, and this speaks to some of the issues the Lakers in general, I think, are having with coming up with moves. From Gary Trent Jr.'s perspective, the roster right now, in terms of backcourts or backcourt guys or undersized small forward options, D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves, Gabe Vincent, Max Christie, Dalton Connect. There's been a lot of tying Gary Trent Jr. to the Lakers, and it's been well reported they have been interested in him. But you do have to at least wonder if he thought his opportunity, especially as somebody looking to showcase himself for next offseason, would be better with Milwaukee. And it speaks to the Lakers having some difficulties, I think, coming up with trades, because they've got a lot of their tradable contracts are their best players. So it becomes difficult to make one of these deals that actually feels like an upgrade.
Trent will fill the spot essentially that Malik Beasley played for the Bucks last year and played quite well, certainly much better than he did with the Lakers, much to the disappointment of Lakers fans. Again, it's just a disappointment. Everything seems to be followed with much to the disappointment of Lakers fans. But The problem, what it really does for me, I don't know if Gary Trent would have chosen the Lakers over the Bucks. I mean, when you're talking 1-year deals, you are really focused, very narrowly on what you think, especially when he's 25 years old, like what you think your role is going to be. Who do you trust to reestablish where you reestablish your value and all those other things, really with the expectation that you're not going to be in the same place next year, because ideally, if you have a role that allows you to play 20 to 25 minutes a night and really thrive and all those other things, the team that signs you, particularly if it's a good team, the Bucks, the Lakers, whatever it is, won't have the space really or the flexibility to bring you back. So, I'm sure he looked into all the different situations. Perhaps if he felt that LA was a better fit, he might have been willing to hang out a little while longer while they tried to, but probably not. And this gets back to what you're saying, this crowd that they have. And it's not so much just that they have a crowd at the end of the roster, Andy. It's they have too many guys who aren't very good, who aren't going to, realistically are not going to contribute quality minutes on a consistent basis, for a high level NBA team. And I'm talking about obviously Bronny and Maxwell Lewis. I think you can put Hood Schifino in that group right now, certainly until he shows differently. And that's something else that we can maybe get into a little bit. It's just the disappointment of Hood Schifino this summer, not because he's doing anything wrong. He's just hurt. He can't play.
He's not doing anything. That's the problem. He's not actually doing anything. He's rehabbing, but he's not doing anything that lets you know, oh, okay, he looks good on the court. We can start getting excited, even optimistic about his second season.
Right. Well, sort of like we were thinking about Max Christie last year before we realized he wasn't going to play. That, this idea that it's kind of a free agent signing. Like if JHS could actually give you 12 good minutes a night, 14 good minutes a night, and more on those nights when you needed him, that's like signing another free agent, because they didn't have that last year. But the odds of that seem lower since he's not able to play and continue that development and build on what was, to be fair, a successful run in the G League last year before the injuries shut him down. But so JHS is in that group. Bronny, Maxwell Lewis. I would put Cam Reddish in there just because I don't think he's very good. Jackson Hayes on any given, he's not that he's bad, but is he a high enough caliber backup center that you really believe in to give you, big, rotation minutes nightly? I don't know. I mean, it's 3 or 4 or 5 guys, depending on how you view the roster, that just aren't all that playable at the back end.
And none of them have contracts that are useful. Like
right.
That's really the biggest problem, is that they don't help you as players, and they don't help you as expiring contracts. Like they're not the version of the Mavericks last year, moving Grant Williams and Seth Curry and Rashawn Holmes. Those guys, attached with first-round picks, they were disposable players. Like I don't mean to put it coldly, but in terms of Dallas's rotation and their lack of place in it, or in Grant Williams's case, his immediate non-fit on the court and by reports in the locker room, those were all guys that were expendable, would be a better word than disposable. But the Mavericks were I want to make sure I'm being respectful to guys, but right. The Mavericks were fully able to move on from those guys and then add Daniel Gafford, add PJ Washington, and actually improve. The Lakers back end guys don't help them as trade chips, and some of the front end guys that they could be looking to move are too good to be considered expendable. So it's a tough place to be in. And, Gary Trent Jr., I think in a lot of ways represents the Lakers' bind, and also to the idea of, are they just going to be stuck in neutral, not able to do anything? In a lot of ways, he's more of a symbol of the situation than necessarily a massive opportunity lost.
Yeah, let's stick on that, because I think it is important to kind of contextualize what we're looking at here and why it is so frustrating, and what exactly is the shortcoming that we're dealing with in mid, almost rolling towards the back third of July. So we'll get to all that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by Game Time. My daughter is 13, and we have bonded a lot over the years through music. And lately, it's been Frank Ocean, who she is obsessed with. And he has not put out an album in about 8 years, but there's some rumors that he could be back in the studio, which could mean a tour. And I have promised my daughter, if Frank Ocean does tour, I'm going to get us tickets, even though I know ahead of time these are going to be really, really tough to get, but I'm not worried because of Game Time. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy shows, and theater near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun. They got flash deals where you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or less, Game Time offers you 110% of the difference. That's your credit. It is the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Snag the tickets without the stress using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
So we'll get to the back to this offseason thing in a second. I do want to let people know, if you missed the news, and obviously there's a lot going on in the world, certainly could understand it. The Lakers have already added Nate McMillan, Scott Brooks, and Greg St. John to their to JJ Redick's staff. On Tuesday, they also added Lindsey Harding, who is the G League Coach of the Year, coached in the Sacramento organization for the Stockton Kings. She will be joining the staff for JJ Redick. She has a long connection with Redick going back to her time as a player development coach in Philadelphia. She went to Duke as Redick also did. So certainly an interesting hire for the Lakers, and a coach who has accomplished a lot at the G League level, very well thought of. Interviewed in Charlotte for the job that went to Charles Lee. Pretty intriguing. I can't say I necessarily know a lot about what the Stockton Kings did last year in terms of how they run their offense and what that, but it's an intriguing hire by the Lakers.
Also, too, she can ball, because she was the number 1 overall pick in the 2007 WNBA draft. So beyond her credentials coaching, she's got credentials on the court, which is something that always gets talked about in terms of women being added to NBA staffs. Like all the different things that people concern themselves over in terms of the idea of whether women can earn the respect of male players. To be honest, I think it is much less of a thing now than it used to be, especially considering this generation of NBA players. They are legit WNBA fans. They are there all the time. Like, they love the games, and I think they really respect these women. But for what it's worth, she's a really, really good basketball player.
Yeah. So Lindsey Harding becomes the first female assistant in franchise history. So congratulations to her. JJ Redick's staff filling out, and perhaps this might be one of those times we dial up Locked On Kings to get a little bit of insight, because
Yes.
As we do with the over 200 shows on the Locked On Network, when things like this happen, we immediately turn to our network colleagues to get scouting reports and things like that. So our friend Matt George at Locked On Kings might have some insights. We'll be nudging him for a little bit of knowledge there. He has extra because he actually works in TV up there. So he really covers all kinds of sports as well as Sacramento. So check them out after you're done checking us out. I get why fans are so frustrated, and it's one of these deals where every time a different player signs on the cheap, like Taurean Prince leaves and goes to Milwaukee, and okay, haha, he follows Darvin, isn't that cute and whatever, but at the same time, like a useful player just walked out the door for very little money, and a potential replacement for Taurean Prince and Gary Trent, and certainly younger, probably a little bit better, but certainly younger. he walks out walks to a different door, through a different door, I should say, also for very little money. And every
The
other
least amount possible.
Yeah.
You can't go any lower.
Right. And it's the sort of thing, like the logistics of it are a little trickier too. And like, not only would they have to open a roster spot, they would have had to make sure that LeBron left enough money on the table for a Gary Trent and all these. But like, without getting too deep into the weeds of all this, this is like Lakers fans this is going to be the Groundhog Day of the offseason as the remaining free agents sign these 1-year deals and they all go to one place or another. And it's not going to be the Lakers because until the box changes that they're in, until they figure out how to get out of these constraints, none of this matters. Like the errors put them here can't be fixed yet. And Andy, it's like we've talked about it. It's not as easy to undo the path that brought them here by like selling off second round picks or all these other things, because they don't have very much of that stuff. And so to use it to get rid of Cam Reddish, that's not an easy thing to do.
It's certainly not an easy thing to stomach. I mean, it may be something that they need to do. And I hope that if it becomes necessary for the right opportunity, they recognize this is just the literal cost of doing business.
Right. But it also means that's one less thing that you have to make a trade of greater significance down the road.
That's why it's a cost of doing business. It's not a literal just price or whatever. It's an actual cost. There's a trickle-down effect. I was thinking about this too with Gary Trent Jr. because we've talked about this before. The Lakers have done nothing new for this team other than drafting Dalton Knecht and Bronny James. They've just retained their own guys from last year, whether because guys picked up their player options or because, like in the case of Max Christie or LeBron, they re-signed them. But it's been a pretty quiet offseason in general. Like there's not been a ton of action, I think, during the summer anyway. Like there were some guys who re-signed before with their own teams before free agency even opened up. And there's been a lot that the Lakers really could not reasonably get involved with to begin with, like, Paul George or Malik Monk. These were guys that KCP, these are guys that they were not going to be able to get. Some of the guys on LeBron's mid-level exception list, James Harden was never realistic. They tried their best to overpay Klay Thompson. I think they tried to get DeMar DeRozan. They tried to get Jonas Valanciunas for various reasons. Whether because I think in the case of Valanciunas, he just chose somewhere else, or when it came to trying to come up with a trade for DeRozan or Klay, the other teams did not want any salary back at all or anything of substance, and they couldn't find third teams that worked out. So up until now, as much as I get why Laker fans have been upset by just seeing the team in no motion at all, I don't feel like they've missed out on much that really felt realistic or a great idea. But Trent now signing with the Bucks feels like the Lakers are officially on the clock when it comes to the idea of stuff that could happen. Are you going to miss out on it? Like at this point, like we're now starting to get into the type of players that theoretically you could have a shot at if you're just willing to either bite the bullet or you can make a relatively simple deal. Are you going to do it? That's what it feels like right now. Like the clock is now ticking.
Yeah, I mean, and again, the math,
whether it's really damaging to the Lakers or not, it just feels like
sure.
This is the clock starting.
It gets people's attention. Like they are the only team, I believe they're the only team that hasn't made really a move, that hasn't signed an external free agent, done any kind of change to their roster. And everyone, I mean, on the one hand, and Jovan Buha, our friend at The Athletic, well, maybe we'll talk about this after the break, he broke it down. Like there's one more part of this box that is important to consider as we all, go back to the original sin of Russell Westbrook. In this window with LeBron and AD, this 1 or 2 year window, whatever's left, there's one more really critical aspect of it that needs to be considered. We'll get to it next. the general consensus, obviously the Lakers aren't a garbage team, but they're not a real contender in the Western Conference. If you put 2 or 3 teams, 4 teams up the top, the Lakers are not in that group. LeBron has said it, JJ Redick has said it, other people say it, Jovan's reporting in Vegas say, the most of the scouts and executives that he talks to think the Lakers are between a 5 and a 10 seed or something like that, looking, if not at the play-in, at something close to the play-in. The other thing that is important here, though, is they really only have enough stuff to make one more swing in the LeBron AD era, to in terms of really genuinely impactful moves. As things stand right now, at least, when you look at their roster and you look at their first round picks and you look at all that other stuff that they have, they can kind of only do one thing, and even then, you see what's being reported as Utah wants for marketing and things like that. They still could be priced out of a lot of stuff. So if you only have one swing, Andy, you have to be really careful about when you take it.
Yeah, and it gets further complicated too, because it's been well reported for going on over a year that the Lakers have had a difficult time finding takers for D'Angelo Russell, which is how they keep ending up back with him, but on these short-term deals that never feel particularly secure. From D'Lo's side, I think his enthusiasm is there. I think D'Lo would actually like to be here long-term, but that enthusiasm is clearly not shared by the Lakers. But they're having a difficult time with him being the guy that I think he's the most combination of contract that is substantive enough to bring back somebody who matters and somebody they are willing to part ways with without really thinking much about it, right or wrong. And it puts them in an even more difficult position to make that move, because like you said, they really only have about one more bullet of substance left to fire, and they're having a difficult time just getting the bullet in the gun, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, and I don't know where look, I mean, I was among the people who thought that they might not get a better deal for Westbrook than the Indiana deal that was reportedly on the table. I do not know the exact contours of what that would have had to look like and all of those things in the end, what that would have been. But let's just sort of take it at face value of, Hield and Turner for Westbrook and stuff, including draft capital. I think you could argue they didn't necessarily, especially now when you see how things have gone and where they've gone, what they've been able to turn things into. Miles Turner, even with giving up some of the other stuff, you probably don't have Dalton Connect because that pick is gone. Maybe or potentially, well, maybe not, but the other things would be out the door because Turner would be the best player that they could have gotten in return. You can wait and be patient and watch all these things go by, but there's no guarantee that what you're going to be left with and the opportunities that come are going to be better than what you've been looking at. The Lakers didn't make a move at the deadline last year because they were looking at this offseason with the extra draft pick and the calm of the summer and all these other things as a better environment to make a bigger swing. And they haven't been able to get it done. Now, for context, again, like you pointed out in the first segment, a lot of reasons contribute to that. But the landscape is constantly shifting. So what you think is going to be an opportunity in February may not come around. And so if you're waiting for an 8 out of 10, because right now you can only get a 6 or a 7, well, in February, you might only get 5 or 6s, in terms of that 10-point scale of something you really want to do. That is the box that they're in as well, as going on with that 15-man roster.
Well, it also gets complicated by, the idea of, well, maybe you can get that 6 or 7, but if we really need like an 8 or an 8.5 in order for this to be worth it, another layer of complication.
That's a great point. A 5 doesn't work for them. A 6 doesn't work for them. They do need a 7, an 8, a 9, a 10 on a 10-point scale to really move the needle. It's a great point.
Yeah. I mean, and it's one thing to make that 5 deal if you are much closer or, and you just feel like, screw it. Let's just go all in. Maybe it's a bit of an overpay, but we feel like we're really close. or if they were just flush with assets and they would be like, you know what, it's just a 5, but we got so much other stuff. Let's just do it and keep looking around. They really have to nail this thing because of the various constraints that they're dealing with, which will, by the way, too, fair to him or not, put extra light on Bronny taking up an actual roster spot, which leads to, during Monday's Summer League game, stop me if you've heard this before, the Lakers lost. They're playing the Celtics, and Jaylen Brown, reigning finals MVP, was in attendance talking with WNBA player Kaiser Gondrezick and Angel Reese. They were all sitting together, and some lip readers speculated that Brown said something like, I don't think Bronny's a pro. And that obviously, because he got caught on camera, created this big stir, and people were all up about it. And Jaylen Brown then tweeted out, quote, "It's a flex to have your son alongside you in the NBA. It reflects greatness and longevity. Bronny has all the tools around him to be successful. I look forward to watching his growth," which, by the way, is not an apology, nor is it walking back anything you said. It's just offering the lad your best wishes.
Well,
and giving respect to his pops.
Sure. The part that was really interesting, though, about that reported lip reading conversation was the back and forth. Because Brown, she said, he'll be in the G League all year, and his response was, no, because his dad he's not. He'll be with he's going to be like that. To me, is the place where we'll see, because there's you and I don't totally agree on this. I know there are a lot of people who are willing to go a lot farther about what's good or bad for Bronny and whether or not he is a passenger on this rather than somebody who's helping steer his own young career.
To clarify, just for folks who have not heard the conversations of the last few weeks, I have been very skeptical that this has actually been in Bronny's best interests.
Or the best interests is certainly that something that can be debated, but frankly, this is a lot of people that this is something that he wants.
Well, I'm not convinced that it's what he wants. I'm not. Convinced
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. There are some people who believe that as well.
Sure, I want to clarify it, so my position is as clear as possible. I am not convinced that this is in his best interest in terms of developing as a player. I'm not convinced that he is as excited about this as LeBron is, and frankly, I'm not convinced that this is as much. I know it is in a lot of ways more about LeBron than Bronny in terms of that is why Bronny is on this roster. Like you have to be incredibly naive not to recognize that. I just mean in terms of the story. The story itself feels much more about LeBron and the chapters of LeBron's story than the chapters of Bronny's story.
Yeah, and I think if you look around the league, there are a lot of guys who are on 3 or 4 year deals with option years and things like that. Bronny's buyout or whatever is probably higher than most of them, but I really would want to compare it to other Rich Paul clients before making a huge.
Sure.
But the broad contract that he's under, the Lakers could have very well drafted a different player at 55 and signed him to a very similar deal. They probably shouldn't have. If they weren't going to draft Bronny, it would have been a good year to either draft somebody who would take a two-way, get a stash guy, or whatever it might be, because almost nobody there isn't anybody that we're going to pick at 55 who's going to play for him this year without just shocking everyone.
I mean, if Bronny was a high school senior heading into his freshman year at USC this year, I am very confident the Lakers would have not used that pick on anybody who would take up a roster spot definitively. I'm very confident about that.
I don't know about that, actually, only because they don't manage these things particularly well. But I either way, that's certainly it's
Rob Pelinka. I mean, say what you will about Pelinka's managing skills, but he has a pretty consistent track record of leaving a roster spot open.
That's true, but he also has a pretty good track record of mismanaging second round picks and how they sign them and what they do with them and things like that. And if they had a prospect that they really liked and wanted to keep and wanted to make sure that they could hold on to him, I think that I agree with you that that's what they should have done in a non-Bronny world, and could be what they did, and maybe even for the odds favorite. I'm just not willing to say that they would have. But what I thought was the more interesting point that of that conversation wasn't the idea that, is Bronny an NBA player right now? The answer is obviously no, and everybody knew that when he was drafted. He is a way below caliber offensive player, not nearly good enough defensively to make up for that. I mean, like, it's not even close. Like, he's got to fix that part of his game to make the defense something that can be useful. But the idea that he wouldn't be in the G League all year, that's the thing that, like, if that turns out to be true, and I would be very surprised if it is, but if that turns out to be true, then I think all of the critics will have rightly a field day.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I think Jaylen Brown's wrong about that. I think a lot of people have wrongly interpreted Rich Paul saying that Bronny was not going to sign a two-way deal as him, by extension, saying he won't play in the G League. To the best of my knowledge, Rich Paul has never said he won't play in the G League. He's just said he's not signing a two-way deal. There's a big difference.
Right.
Jaylen,
what he was saying with that is not signing a two-way means we are going to get a guaranteed contract. And the reason for that is we have a guy who we believe in his talent. We see, the athleticism is obviously there. That play on Monday where he jumped up to block the alley-oop pass. Like, I mean, the kid has athletic talent and he moves well defensively, but he is a developmental player. And when he says we're not signing a two-way, it's because two-way players don't have security. Guys with guaranteed contracts do. So he can go develop. He can spend this season in the G League. He can spend next season in the G League. I would be really surprised, short of major injuries or just kind of the ebb and flow of a season where you end up with more games than you expect that don't matter. If Bronny plays 10 games in the NBA this year, I would be surprised.
It would be actually, I think, not in Bronny's interests to keep him out of the G League. And I think Rich Paul is smart enough to recognize that. What I find most interesting, though, about this thing with Jaylen Brown and Bronny is just it is yet another example of what Bronny either signed up for or got tossed into by others by specifically going to the Lakers with his father, and the scrutiny that it gets even more magnified. Like, LeBron James's son would have eyes on him regardless, but the Lakers and LeBron and Rich Paul manufacturing his path to the NBA only like this specific way. Like, it was basically he's going to the Lakers. That is going to add more scrutiny, and there is no way around that reality, which, as I've said before, I would argue is not in Bronny's best interest, but either way, this is the place where we're at.
Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 24,000 subscribers. Leave us questions, leave us comments. We do scroll through them every day. We try to respond to them, and they often inspire the topics for the show. We'll be back tomorrow. Still haven't talked about the IST draw. Obviously, more summer Lakers. That is not intended as a threat, and all sorts of free agent inaction.
They play tonight.
They do. Again, not a threat or intended to be one. See everyone tomorrow.